Okay, a little preface before we get into the cold open. I had a little bit of technical difficulties uploading the first set, so we had to re-record again twice this morning. Hopefully, this does not screw me again. So let's get into it. But as for last weekend, a little bit of ups and downs again. A lot of fundamentals being missed. I was kind of disappointed with most of the matches again, outside of like two from Super Rugby and one from the MLR. But such is life. You're gonna have your ups and downs. Let's get into it.
I need all the wins, yeah. Ain't no L's, I gotta get a no call and quits, yeah. Gotta keep on moving no matter how hard.
Here comes Danny Tusizawa, back to Baker, Baker with the fin. Kurt Baker in for DC, and this may well do it Old Glory with the try. The New Zealand Sevens legend, Kurt Baker with the cherry on top.
Can you believe it?
Welcome back to the On the Line Rugby podcast, a show brought to you by the Believe Sports Network. I'm your host, Micah Nagaishi, and welcome back. As I said in the pre-open, had a lot of ups and downs. I think this week was a mixture of really terrible ball by the top teams, at least in Super Rugby. Again, parity is really helping. A lot of these bottom teams middle of the pack teams are really trying to compete for their second and third. Some of them fifth and sixth, arguably. A lot of people are in position to make a polling place, I think, this year for playoffs. I really don't think that I think teams that I had expectations for making it will be there, but we'll get down into the nitty-gritty as we move on. I'll start off with really just the big games that I thought was a great showcase. Really, I think the biggest showcases were the Canes and the Drua, but we'll go in order of that. So I think biggest talking point that I had, at least out of the Canes game, watching it over again, was Harry Godfrey's a G. And I don't understand how he wasn't in the starting polling spot, or at least to be a consistent option off the bench, regardless of whether or not Ruben Love was starting at 15. I would say that the cows come home. Ruben Love should still be the Canes 10. I still think Brett Cameron's a good game manager. I think that Aiden Morgan is still not it for me. I think the jury's still out on him. But I think moving him back to 10 will show off a little bit more of that flat ball play that we saw last year. And it'll allow Godfrey to do the things that he did in this game. Because one could argue, while Ruben Love was the MVP, and while he is, in my opinion, probably going to get it, and despite the fact that he was out, he stepped in and did a damn good job. Whether it was high ball mechanics, passing the ball, great kicks off the boot, good defense, really stopping some line breaks, being there for support lines. And I think the biggest thing, coming at it with power. He's not just a Ruben Love that's going to shake and bake you. He will run through you. We saw that a couple times, and believe me, I was impressed for a guy that size to do what he did, especially coming off of a high ball reception. Very impressed. He deserves more time in that jersey. I think he'll easily be in the U23 All Black consideration again. And I think the Hurricanes, after the last few years of really coming off of bad stretches of, mediocrity and borderline meandering outside of Jordy Barrett and friends, to have a concerted group of young talent that they have, with a Brady Iose, Dupsy Creefy, Peter Lockeye, and friends, they're really coming out to play this year. I think that they have the poise and, above all, the depth to really take the Chiefs away out of that final lifting the shield consideration. That trophy, I think, is theirs to lose as of right now. They control their own destiny, and they're going to need to bring in guys like Harry Godfrey more often, because this guy is a G. He needs to be there. I still would say that 10 and 15 combo between Love and Godfrey would be amazing, but maybe they have other ideas. Who knows? I think the one thing that really hurt the game's momentum after the first 15 minutes of Rebels really just trying to pound home exactly where they wanted to be physically and set the tone in the trenches was the Carter Gordon block that ended up getting called back. I would say that ref made a terrible decision on that point. For those of you who don't know, Paul Williams and Ben O'Keefe have all talked about how they want to have a referee more, I guess, taking responsibility for what their goods and their bads after games, and especially having meetings in the middle of seasons, which I think is a great opportunity for them. And I don't know why it hasn't been implemented from the beginning, but such is life, I guess. And, to take in their goods and obviously say, hey, we made a mistake, and meet with teams, obviously, before having their press conference. I think that's huge for not only having that level of transparency for the officiating group, who have obviously come into a lot of questions after the last few real seasons, probably since the Lions tour in South Africa with Nick Berry, who I still believe should not be a ref at the international level. But, that should not have been a block. I think that he deserved a opportunity to really take that ball. We've seen that already with the Waratahs, the Blues, the Reds. They've all taken front foot ball and trying to either rush a kicker or block a goal line drop. And, whether it's succeed or not, it's there, and it's not a knock forward. You're actively concerting to stop the ball from moving forward, and you're putting it back on front foot. I think it should have been play on, and I think that really could have changed the momentum in that game, because right after that and the preceding card, it was not a good time. I wasn't personally impressed. I feel like the Rebs kind of left broken for a majority of that game, and I think that's allowed the Canes to really pump on the aggression and really try to hammer home that intensity of saying, hey, this is our game and we're just going to take it from you. Being that as it may, though, I think we have a little bit of good news for the Canes to jump back to them for Ruben Love. Obviously, for those of you who have seen the lineups, I tried to record this yesterday again, and 3 times it delete. So the good news for Ruben Love, obviously, is back in the starting lineup for tonight. For those of you who didn't know, now you know. But I think the good thing is that ankle injury is not as bad as we thought, and I'm very glad to see that he's back in the starting lineup. Just to have that MVP level talent back there is really going to help grow that team. And obviously Harry Godfrey's feeding off of that. So good opportunity for them to really put it on, especially against a really bad team this weekend that I think they're again going to blow out. I have hope. The Landers are not, I would say they're going to still remain middle of the pack. They're not going to be anywhere higher than that. So we'll see what happens. But, to kind of wrap up for this, after a strong start from the Rebs in terms of just physicality and defense, really setting the tone and playing for their coach, I'm personally worried that it's going to start to slide from here. Obviously, the Drua, I also had worries about that. They came out swinging in the last 2 weeks to really show that they can put themselves out there to be on the best football that they can do. But to have that level of lack of confidence to really put on anything. Andrew Kellaway really came on in a big way, but then left last week. I just can't say, I wanted them to be in that second or third spot for Australia to really cement themselves as that Cinderella year season. I think you can go one of 2 ways. You can look at it being that the season's basically a fifth to a quarter away, down the drain. You can look at it and say, hey, we took a lot of good things in the first month. Obviously last week did not go the way we wanted it to, but you can either build off of that and try to build that confidence, maybe get, I'm not sure if team bonding would be the only thing that would really work, but, get something to obviously imbue the team with a little bit of momentum. You obviously have, your biggest signing in Nella Tupou only really making 15 to 20 minutes before getting hurt. Like his body is made of glass. Salah Kailoto can only do so much. Carter Gordon looks like a shell of himself since the World Cup. There has to be something to be done to rebuild this team's momentum and keep it moving, because if not, it's going to be a consistent slide from here, and the team that we saw for the last month may just fade away from memory, just like my unfortunate jersey with the Sale Sharks for the rest of this year. You have to keep that confidence going. You have to keep that positive momentum and goodwill going for the rest of that team. I know there's a lot of distractions, some of which we will be talking about later, but you have to do something to kind of level the boys in, bring them all together and say, hey, this is us versus the world, especially against Rugby Australia. And this is our way to stick it to everyone and say that we are going down and not going down begging. As for my second game, I think the Drua game versus, that was a good game. I was very impressed. Obviously the Taz let the Drua back in the game after a weak lackluster effort on D and really not spreading down with adequate fundamental help, provided acres of space that were normally not there for the Drua for majority of their losses this year, and they were tight in the wrong areas. I've said it again and again and again, whether this is the MLR, whether it's the Premiership, or whether it's Super Rugby, you have to represent where you stand in terms of talent and athletic ability. I think everyone can agree that the MLR, in comparison to like a Premiership, a top 14, a Pro D, the URC or Super Rugby, is essentially minor leagues. Everyone's going to try to transfer in and out of that league. It's more of a feeder farm league for most of these guys to try to get their international eligibility in. The USA is a shell of itself. You can accept, a couple little things here and there that, would normally not be allowed in most club sports, but we let it go. In terms of these bigger comps that obviously have the pedigree, the culture, the coaching, the athletic talent on display, you have to do better in terms of having your fundamentals down. And I really think that the Taz let themselves go this game, and it really showed. For the Drua to dominate set piece the way they do, I understand that they're bigger and more athletic, but the Taz have known to be one of the more physical teams in that Australian lineup, and they got bullied all around the park. Whether it was bad at breakdowns with gang counter rucks and really being a big part in setting up lineup disturbances to really knock the ball back to their end, or get penalties on the Taz in terms of not having the ball not straight. In playing great goal line defense. I think it just boils down to how they played, because obviously, everyone knows the Drua have that finesse, the ability to offload, play crazy front football, backyard footy, as we would say, and they can do that all day, every day. But, when you encounter a more physical centered team, when you look at a team like the former Crusaders or the Chiefs of last couple years, actually, they have obviously the best at the time, best discipline and best set piece, and that always won the day out. With the Drua can build off of this victory and the tight loss last week to the Blues, I think that shows a lot and can really put themselves in that position to not only maybe make a quarterfinal, but obviously advance further than that, because that's the kind of margins that you're going to have to win to really defeat these clinical teams. I definitely think that the Taz, when they had their 7 trips to the 5-meter line and not even put in a try or points, is atrocious. It is ferocious. I can't name another word that would probably give it more tragedy than what it was. At that point, I would just, go for 3. The Drua were just pounding them at line out. They couldn't get them all in. And at D, they bended, but they did not break every step of the way. And the only reason why they kept getting shots at that 5-meter line is mostly because of offsides penalties or not releasing. The Drua are going to be that kind of semi-disciplined team. I think we all know that. But for you to go 7 trips and not even make a single point is pretty bad. I mean, obviously Charlie Gamble did it on the 8th one, but it shouldn't have taken that long. If things are not working, at least after the 2nd or 3rd try, I'm surprised the coach didn't, radio down and say, hey, take the shot, maybe go for a scrum, spice it up a little bit. But no, I don't know what was going on with DC. Perhaps his head was in a different place. Maybe they did and they just couldn't get it to the players. I don't know. Something went wrong. And I think that really was a turning point in that game in terms of how the Taz are going to play it. Because, obviously, when you line up on D and you're lackadaisical in getting back to the line, which is a fireable offense in my personal opinion, or, not calling out where you need support in, or spreading down where you're supposed to be, and instead of just lining up behind the ruck like a bunch of 5-year-olds hoping that the ball is going to roll to your way, it is not going to work like that. And, giving guys like Iosef Omasi with that much space to basically where the commentator is going to say, oh, he's going to get his 4th, 5th, 6th try. What are you doing? That's blasphemous. Like, I understand Masi was Super Rugby's leading try scorer with Mark Talea. I understand that he's an international cap player and he's a freak on the edge. But you can't be giving that. Obviously the Drua were doing something. The other teams against the Drua over the last month have been doing something right to stop him and really Vota from getting front football out to the wing. A lot of teams have slowed them down. I would like to say they kind of hitched a trailer onto Iosef Omasi just because of the fact that he wasn't able to really break the line and or score until the last couple weeks. And it shows. They really put it on the game plan. Yes, Ravu Taumanda broke it open, but I feel like everyone on that Fijian team can break one open. It's all the matter of taking out their most explosive players, and that's what they did. The Taz under DC have a good coaching staff. They should really be hammering that home to really make it front foot to really stop him, and they didn't do it, and I was wholly disappointed in that. They need to do better. And to talk more about their defense, Mark Nawani Tawase, I've talked about you last week. I know you probably don't listen to this, but I hope you do, because somehow, some way, you always find a way, as Stephen A. Smith says, to make a business decision and mess things up for your team. It is not a good day. I am thoroughly hurt at the fact that you, as a wing, a Wallaby international capped wing, do not have the wherewithal to not only call for more defense, to put more physicality into your hits, chase after opponents. I'm going to keep calling you out on this until this changes. You need to stop making business decisions, my boy, because you're letting things go. In games where margins are this tight, especially in Super Rugby, where you're still fighting for that that maybe 6th spot to get into the playoffs, you got to do better. And when you're really just taking arm tackles, trying to bear hug someone very high, which at this rate should not be called all the time, especially with the tackle drop law being implemented this year, you have to do better. You're walking or jogging back on a line break instead of really chasing down. You have the speed to do it. I don't know how you're not at least trying. At least you're gonna run after him and maybe dive at his feet, something. I don't know. Or on D, how could you even think that it was a bright idea to put your hand in the dirt, line up tight, and not call for a spread down? And then when you finally move, don't call for the spread down of your D, your support, to really get them in, and you just leave 2 gaps big enough for an 18-wheeler to drive through. We need to talk about that. Obviously giving Iosef Omasi front football is bad already, but to give him gimmies like that, nah. We got to do better than that. I know you're playing league, and I'm sure league has probably gotten you maybe a contract opportunity to say, hey, don't get hurt. And maybe that's what you're doing. Maybe that's not what you're doing. Maybe you're pulling a Calvin Ridley. I don't know. Figure it out. Someone needs to investigate this fool. Maybe he's doing gambling on the side. I don't know, but he's doing something, and he's influencing this game. And I was disappointed that he was hurting his own teammates. You have to do better. DC's a good coach. I'm glad he's probably not getting fired after round 4. At least that's what I hope, given the fact that they didn't fire him after his big decision. But, this team needs to stop taking their foot off the gas if they really want to get that momentum going. I'm tired of them being that second place team in the comp for Australia and getting basically bumped out of a quarterfinal. They have the talent on display. It's all about whether or not those stars, those Mark Nawani Tawases, can really band together, those Jed Holloways, those Angus Bells, those Charlie Gambles, and really put something together that can be something special. And as of right now, I don't see it. And I hope it changes. As for the Chiefs game, I really would just there's not a lot of things for me to really break down and talk about. I think it was a perfect game for the Chiefs, outside of the fact of some things late where they really just kind of were playing volleyball with the Highlanders, and things happen. But they didn't really take their gas off late. I think it was a clinical game on all fronts. On offense, defense could still use a little bit of work. Set piece could still be a little bit of work. But that's really all I could really glean away from that game. I think the biggest thing that I could glean from Super Rugby that was a disappointment was the Satyrs versus Blues game. I guess what I can really say with it, putting it nicely, was that, if you look at the Blues, they've always been a team of stars over the last at least 8 years since I've been watching them. And, it's always been a game of, can they last the whole game? Are they going to get blown out? Are they going to blow the team out, or are they going to give it up late and make this tight and interesting? And I think we saw that again this year, just this year in general. I think if you look at Stevie P and the way he's playing, I think he looks different over the last few years of his prominence, or if that's just me, maybe that's just me. I really enjoyed having him be that front foot setter that not only attack the game line, put the ball in front foot for his homies, but take it upon himself to really be that electrifying player that everyone wanted to see, and when he was always hurt. And if you look at how they ran Bowden Barrett out of town, I really thought that he would take it upon himself to be like, okay, hey, this is my team now. This is how I'm going to play, and we're going to run with it. And unfortunately, we saw mostly a game manager that looked like Bowden Barrett at 15 on all of his years for the Blues, just playing. And I was expecting a different CVP, and I kind of got it this match. I'm not gonna lie, it was kind of a nice comeback, to see him attack the line 4 or 5 times in the whole game. I think he needs to do more of that. I think that's what the Blues are going to really need to do, because obviously you can't rely on Mark Tilley and Caleb Clark and Rico Ioane to do everything. Hassan Satudu is looking a little, just getting extra mileage up there, and you're going to need some extra help. We'll talk about some help that they maybe have, and he's a developing star, but they really need to look at themselves in the mirror. The Satyrs are not that team anymore. I think losing Razor, and obviously, you could have got a better coach. I don't know. You could have maybe seduced Wayne Smith to come back. You could have maybe got, let's see, who else could I think of? I don't know. Maybe you could have got Joe Schmidt to not coach the Wallabies. Canterbury got that budget. Come on. What are we doing? Taranaki has that budget. Someone put that in. Anybody, you could have got anybody but Rob Penny. You got one of the worst coaches I think I've ever seen play. It was terrible how he led the Taz, and you let this guy come in here and basically blow up that roster. When you look at how they've played, they're a bottom of the roster. Outside of their kind of talented depth that they have, they're not playing together. They look lost without Willie Hines, who I didn't even know who that was coming into this year. But during his yellow card, you could tell that team was lost, and they had the momentum and then quickly lost it quickly. And then obviously when Hines came back, they got it back. But even with guys like Mitch Drummond on the pitch, getting Rivez Rehana back tonight, it's terrible when you're not stooping yourselves higher than what you are. For the Blues to only put up 6 points against the Satyrs is a moral victory for them. But we need to look at how they're going to play moving forward, and it's kind of disappointing how they play. I know Rob Penny has to know what goal line defense is, and especially offsides, and I think that was pathetic. I've been seeing this time in and time out for them, just giving up penalties at the goal line within the 22 and back, and basically in their own red zone, to be having that kind of problem constantly. They were warned many a time, talk to the boys, and they didn't do it. And you showed, whether it was Maka Springer, knocking a ball back that probably would have been a penalty try to Mark Talea, or, offsides at ruck time, collapsing mauls. We got to do better, guys. Come on. You guys were one of the most clinical teams over the last, 7 or 8 years that I've been watching, and you guys fell apart this fast. I know you guys have guys on that team. I know the coaching staff is not it, but we need to band together and do something better. There's a lot that I think it was more of a moral victory for the Satyrs overall than it was for the Blues. I would say the only real shining star that they had was Cole Forbes and Caleb Clark really balling out. Cole Forbes can really be him, between his sneaky little elusiveness opportunities, his ability to attack the game line and really hit good supporting lines. And on top of that, his timing with offload was amazing. I think he can be there. Outside of that, I think this Blue loss can really be washed out, like most of them this year. The jury's still out on me for them to really see that they can push the envelope this year, and I don't think it's going to be it. They're definitely not lifting up any shield or trophy, I can tell you that. If they're going to get bumped, they're probably going to get bumped in the semifinal. So we'll see about that. You have plenty of time to prove me wrong. As for the MLR, I really didn't really watch a lot of games. I'm going to be honest with you. I watched 2 games. I watched the NOLA versus Dallas game, and I watched the Houston versus Seattle game. But the rest of them, I watched a little bit of highlights and some replays, so we'll kind of break down my top 5 takeaways. And also, little side note, surprisingly, I still remain on access for most of these comprehensive stats given out by Moby. So I guess I'll take it where I can, and we'll get some content with this out of it. So let's get into Utah versus LA. I thought that was my most interesting game that I rewatched. I definitely think that Utah gave that game away. Despite winning the whistle margin by 2-1 and having the ball for a majority of the game, to give it away by loose defensive efforts is really just terrible. And I know I've talked about how the MLR is just a minor league basically, but come on, guys. The Utah Warriors are one of the best teams in the league. They've always been cornerstones of the comp since their inception in 2018. They're that dog. And I think over the last couple of years, they've really shown that they're starting to lose that a little bit. And I think they're just starting to deal with that. Oh, we can live off the electricity, but you really can't. You need solid efforts on all facets of the ball. And this really showed. And I think they have to look at themselves in the mirror and say, hey, we need to do something about that, just because of the fact that you need to be getting back on defense better. You need to be setting up better. I've talked about it with the Waratahs. You need to spread down and have communication, because that they just opened up free things for Andrew Cohen friends to really just exploit. And it was really sad to watch. I really think they should have enforced their will at scrum time. ATL is known for having demonstrable levels of terrible, terrible effort at set piece. I've talked about it in my columns last year. I've discussed it on previous shows over the last couple of years. They are an exploitable team in all facets of the game at set piece. And under their head coach, Steve Brett, they've really fallen off a cliff since that Giltini final. But, Utah is definitely bigger. They have better scrum coaching. I think their forwards are more physical, which I like, and they should have enforced their will. But they left a lot on the table in all facets of the game, especially at scrum time. And allowing them to win set piece margins barely is another disappointing act by the Warriors. We need to do better, guys. Also, I think something needs to be said about having Joe Mono and Isaiah Cruz and Mika Cruz come into this game and you don't feed them the ball. I know that Paul Lasika is a G. He deserves the ball. I know Joel Hodgson can be a G. He deserves the ball. But when you have guys like the Cruz brothers, you have a Caleb Makini, you have a Joe Mono who's coming back and looked nasty with ball in hand. On the few opportunities he got, he really attacked the line. Obviously, that try celebration was one of the best, I think, that I've seen out of the MLR in the last, 6 years that they've been open. And having that available is something you need to capitalize on. You're going to need to feed them more. I know Joe Mono had, the fourth, I believe, in meters gained. The Cruces were really feeding the ball out everywhere. But we need to do better in feeding your stars, just because obviously Lasika can't do it all. And you're going to need to find more options. Give Joe Mono the ball. He seemed ready to be fed, and you didn't feed him. And I think that's why that game got given away in some forms on the offensive front. So we need to look at ourselves in the mirror and admit our difficulties in that game. LA, while they have great efforts on defense, I think a lot of them are up there in the leading tacklers for this year. But just because they have great effort doesn't mean that they deserve it. Utah deserved it, and they gave that game away easy on Calvin Ridley levels of giving it away. Mark Nawani Tawase levels of giving it away, and that's sad. As for Nola, King Carlos, you're that man. Not only are you that man on the pitch, you're that man off the pitch. Highly impressed. For those of you who don't know, King Carlos, a.k.a. Carlos Spencer, a.k.a. the 10 God of New Zealand, not named Dan Carter, has been the coach for the backs and attack over at NOLA for the last couple years. He took a year off and came back this year, and I'm very impressed with what he's done with this team. Obviously, NOLA has had a great back line. They've always had it over the last couple years, especially after getting JP Duplessis, Rodney Iona, all those boys ready. But really this year, I think they can take to the final, and I would not be surprised if this is their inaugural final for them. They deserve it, especially with Ed Fido at backline. I've heard of Fido. I don't know. Commentators, you have to get that right. We need some form of media guide that surprisingly the MLR does not have. So, such is life. I'm sorry if I butchered that. I've never really watched Ed outside of his antics off the pitch, just because of the fact that he kind of, I think we all know, for all of MLR fans, he plays very much through the whistle and definitely after the whistle. In terms of his antics and chippiness with other players, I think he's kind of entertaining with that, but I think he's kind of a little bit of, an argy bargy housery kind of guy. So we'll see. But in terms of his athletic ability and talent, I've never watched him play at Rooney outside of that. And, for him to ball out the way he did against what I think is a reformed Dallas Jackal team that is capable on both ends, on backs and forwards, of dominating you, to do that to them was impressive. And on top of that, to sacrifice your body and take front football off a line out, be the first guy off the set piece to really just knock someone's head in is impressive. And I think I have to give it to him. He really set up a lot of openings in this match to really get the ball to other players on the field. And I think that's the great unselfish point that a lot of players really need to have, is you kind of need to do the dirty work to really set up the homies out wide if you really want to win. Obviously, it's a team game, but some people don't realize that. So being that as it may, I think Nola also has a lot to really look into regarding how they've played. I know obviously Dallas is more of a set piece led team, with Mario Ledesma and the boys from New England and OG to really come down and bring in their coaching expertise in that team. I think that's really showed out. But their backs are definitely reborn. I think we've seen this already, but their forwards have not skipped a beat. Sam Gola has those boys fired up, between giving up really easy ball in set piece, and especially in lineouts, and letting them maul it in is impressive. I love seeing that kind of play as a former forward myself. Obviously, it wasn't helped by Jared Adams' red card. You kind of lost that piece by 2-1 after that. I know Jared Adams is a G. He's one of the corner pieces of that set piece line out. And especially for, scrum time, he's that guy. But Jared, we need to do better. Come on, man. I know you're better than this. You could have been my forward of the year last year if you didn't do a couple things late. And I think it's showing a little early. We can wipe this out. We can squash this, and you can do better. For your team to let your team down like that and then to lose set piece by 2-1 is embarrassing. We need to do better with that. As for Dallas, they're gonna capitalize on a lot of slow things, and obviously Nola took their foot off the gas, I think, a little late with that game. Just with lackadaisical effort and play. You really saw that with the Sam Gola block and score. If you take that long to kick that into touch and clear that ball out, a guy like Gola is going to take every opportunity to really mess up your day. A guy like Gomez Vada is going to come in and try to jackal that ball. They're going to do a lot of things. They will bring in a team effort. They really bring that dog mentality this year, and I'm really impressed. And I hope they carry that through the rest of this year. You can't be slow with them. I understand Dallas is probably going to be that middle of the pack team again this year. Well, at least that's better than what they've been for the last, 3 or 4 years. But despite improvement, you could have, this game could have been a blowout, larger than what the margins were, and unfortunately they weren't. And I think that's another reason for them to look at themselves at the table and say, hey, if we keep our foot on the gas, this game could have been a 60-point game for us, and we let it go a little bit. As for my Hounds, to insert the Stephen A meme, I'm not having a good day. This is the worst day in a long time. I am not okay. And I'm wholly disappointed in this team, between just total lack of effort and continuity on D, despite Billy Meeks and Mason Flesh kind of showing out. They can't do it alone. They're one step away. They obviously had set piece dominance of a 1.5 to 1 ratio. They just need to capitalize on these little things like empty field, remaining disciplined, limiting their effort from falling apart like they did. It was so bad. This game was terrible to rewatch. I honestly could not. It's giving me a headache just thinking about it. I'm getting Vietnam flashbacks level of disappointment. We need to find more options than feeding the stars. I think it needs to be said. Whether it's on D or off the ball, Billy Meeks can't do it all. He should not be your leading tackler in this game. On top of that, he should not having to make every play. Especially on that. The commentators were talking about the first 2 Jason Patros tries, as Jason Patros is not that guy. He's badass, but he's not that guy. He's not the fastest guy on the pitch. He's not the most elusive. And they let that go. But they left a gap big enough for an 18-wheeler to run through. and 4 guys tried to tackle him, and most of it was just diving arms. Like, they have, I'm gonna call it the Nawani Tawase when you do that, and it really showed. This team looks basically broken and lacking of confidence. They are the American rebels, I guess you could call themselves, and it's pretty bad. There needs to be more guys getting fed the ball. You need to give yourselves more options, because if not, teams are going to run all over you. And on D, you need to do better. That's all I can really say without getting extremely upset and having a rant on this. I could talk about this for an hour plus, but it would hurt my soul. It would hurt your ears. I'm not really down for that. And I like my limited listeners the way I like them. So I guess I'll just move on to another disappointment, at least at the 10 spot for Houston, with the return of AJ to Starfire Stadium. AJ, I expected a little bit better. I expect you to come in here and have a Brett Favre game versus the Packers in Lambeau. And I didn't get it. Or, even a Peyton Manning game in Indy, for all those who know who that is. But, how do you lose your scrums with that pack to Seattle by 2-1? You have the South African coaching. You have big boys in that lineup who I think are way better than any real guy outside of Joe Taufete'e on that Seattle lineup. And you got bullied on every facet. I'm disappointed. You're going to have to wake up and realize that penalties, especially at offsides and knock-ons, are the reason why your team is getting put on this back foot. Having 17 whistles and 2 cards is not going to help your team in any facet. I think anyone could tell you that. I don't think you need me to tell you that. When you look at how they've played, I said it in LA, you're constantly trying to play hero ball. I think you're trying to recreate the highlights that we saw last year, and it's disappointing. We need to do better with that, and just do your job. This team is great. The coaching staff is great. You have the opportunity to really control your own destiny in the West. And I understand, I believe you're still number 1 in the rankings this year, but keep the momentum going and don't let everyone catch up to you. Because if you do, they're going to blap you like they have the last couple of years. That I think you really deserve to be in that semifinal at least spot. Obviously having to be forcing them to be deprived of the ball in the back half in carries and just double the tackle rate is just real showings of effort on that D that really haunted them. I think those missed conversions are going to haunt Seattle and for haunting AJ Alatimu, just because that game should not have been closer as it was. I really thought that they would have pounded up the points and maybe gotten into a 50-point game. But obviously with those conversions and those kicks, they probably would have gotten it. But we're going to have to look at Pote Human, another disappointing week for him to have to look over the film for. I think this team has a lot to look in the mirror for. They're in the middle ground, in my personal opinion. I don't think that they easily deserve to be on the top. I think Seattle has put themselves in that position to really be there, despite their losses here and there. But Houston, the ground's crumbling. When you wake up and realize that the world's ending for you. Your window is rapidly closing. You lost a lot of talent last year. You're probably going to lose more in free agency with the way the salary cap is being designated for you guys. So make the most of your moment. Don't screw this up. Just a little bit of a closer before we enter our post show. Just for all those who did not watch last week's episode, I do recommend you guys do. The last couple of weeks have been mostly about the Rebels and their court trial. I really think that you need to dig deeper into that. The trial has a lot of merit. And obviously, for those of you who didn't read the news, Rugby Australia is basically throwing in the towel. They're not going to help the Rebels in any sense of the word, and they're going to want this to go to trial. And I think this is going to be a breaking eye-opener for the rugby world, especially in Australia and New Zealand, to really look into how this organization has crumbled in Rugby Australia. I think the Rebels have a lot of merit to this trial, and they're going to get everybody paid, whether it's the Rebels and every other team that's struggling, whether it's embezzlement, preferential treatment, however you want to call it. They're winning the case. They're beating the accusations, and they're walking away like kings with this until something changes my mind. So please read into that. trial's going to come up. I think it's going to be the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial for the rugby world, and it'll be an interesting watch. But that's going to be it for me, guys, this week. Thank you again for dealing with a late episode. Hopefully this one goes up on time for tonight, and see you later. Peace.